Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're at in the U.S. or around the world. Welcome to Baseball Outside the Box. Thanks for joining us today. We are excited, as we always are. Every show we get excited because we got somebody new and somebody very good. But before we start, don't forget, go to baseballoutsidethebox.com, check it out, subscribe, and also go to YouTube, Peter Caliendo, and subscribe there. You get all the updates on the show, so you won't miss the show. Remember, podcasts, you can listen to them in 10-minute increments, 20 minutes, however you want. Walking your dog, jogging. That's what I do every day. So I'm always listening to some great podcasts. And thank you, everybody in the U.S. and around the world, where we have listeners in over 100 countries, and we're excited about that. And keep spreading the good word, and we really appreciate it. Everything's free. And of course, a special thank you to ESPN Honolulu. So we want to say to you, aloha, Honolulu, and mahalo for being on the show. We really appreciate it. And this is a special show because we have a young man, but with a tremendous amount of experience, you're going to know in a second here, who first of all was born and raised in Honolulu. He's fourth generation professional player. His grandfather was Wilbur Cooper, playing the big leagues for 14 years. Incredible. And if you know, once I say the name, Keoni DeRenne, which I got that right. I got DeRenne right. I got them both. I was practicing a little bit. And he is the son of John Coop DeRenne, University of Hawaii, and one of the most famous people when it came to working with Tom House, ASMI. He was one of the guys who really revolutionized, talk about weighted balls, talk about bat speed, training and all that. I mean, we're going to talk about that. So let me welcome, and by the way, folks, not only welcome, but he graduated there in Honolulu, went to Arizona State, was drafted by the Braves in the 12th round, started coaching in 2012 for the Pirates, 7 years with the Pirates. He also played 11 years in the minor leagues, so 5 different organizations. Hey, coached AAA with the Cubs, yes, Cubs, go Cubs, in 2019. He is now the assistant hitting coordinator in 2020 and 2021 with one of the best teams in Major League Baseball. Let me tell you, the Kansas City Royals, if you follow them, they've got, they may not have a huge budget, but they got an understanding of how the game should be played and trained and developed in all aspects of the game. So this is going to be a lot of fun. It's not time for me to talk. I want to welcome our guest, Keoni DeRenne. Hey, thank you. And I know we started talking off air 6 a.m. over there, 5:30, wherever it was. So you get up early. And now I know why you're as good as you are, because you don't wait for anybody else. You get up early so you can get better than anybody else. So welcome to the show, Keoni.
Thank you, Pete. And Pete, I am going to correct you on on the bio that you just spit out. I went to the University of Arizona, not ASU, man. That's the.
Did I say ASU?
It's okay. It's
okay.
Oh
man, I had it. University of Arizona.
I'll give you a mulligan on that one.
And I tell all our guests, I'm going to screw up somewhere, so correct me every time. And I think, matter of fact, isn't that one, and not that we're going to start with this, but isn't that one of the things about being a great coach, great manager, is that you got to admit your mistakes. You got to get better at it. If you don't know the mistakes you made, you're never going to get any better, right?
Correct. It's a learning process, and sometimes we learn more from our mistakes than the success that we have, and but we learn from it, we move on, and we become better for it.
Yeah, and I'm proud that I got your name right. And I messed up the University of Arizona, but I'll take that because I think your name's more important than anything else.
That's right.
Hey, listen, for our folks in Hawaii, this is exciting, man. I think it's not just in Hawaii, but all over the world. But, being a native born in Hawaii, take us back. It's got to be incredible. Born in Hawaii, because I've learned about, how many people in Hawaii and the players that came out of there. We learned about all that, but take us back to your history growing up there with a dad that, was an outside the box thinker back then. And so let's start with that, and playing as a young kid playing baseball there, the things maybe you learned and how you got into baseball, why you loved it so much.
Yeah, I was, born, like you said, born and raised in Honolulu. This was all I knew. Like, I didn't know much about the continental United States or the mainland, how we like to call it. But I played pony baseball, which is you go through the levels of coach pitch, and then you finally play. You're facing your own other guys your age for 9 and 10, and then 11 and 12. So yeah, I mean, this was my foundation here, and on top of that, I played basketball in the fall. So baseball in Hawaii was never year round. now everywhere across the globe, if you can have the opportunity to play baseball outside, it's year round. You know, travel ball has been a huge byproduct of that, and have allowed a lot of players to continue their baseball skills because it is a highly skilled game. So, but for me, you know, I was just a regular kid that grew up and I loved the game. I was never forced into playing it. I was probably groomed early to like it based on my dad and being a coach at the University of Hawaii from the time that I was born. So I grew up at the University of Hawaii on that baseball field,
Wow.
and practices and going to all the games. It was just a part of my identity growing up.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll tell you, folks, so you know, um, Keoni also played for Team USA at the collegiate level internationally, and also with the 18U national team. So, I mean, talk about here's a young man who had a great career playing wise, and then came in and started coaching, and has made some major influences in the coaching realm. You know, when you hear a lot, I talked to Carl Iwasaki, he talked about the talent that comes out of Hawaii. It's interesting to find out. I mean, I always like to know kind of the background, why, we're only talking about, it's a small, place. It's not like it's huge population wise, but yet there's, some pretty good big leaguers, great coaches. What do you think are some of the attributes that create the good players that are coming out of there?
I think part of that, Pete, why there's been a lot of talent, even though our population isn't as big as majority of the states that are out there. Number one, I think is the weather, and I think that when you have great weather year round, even if it may not be baseball season, dads grew up that are people that are from your and families that grew up, you have the opportunity to go outside, to go play catch, to go take ground balls, possibly go and take batting practice, even though their son or daughter, if they're playing baseball, even at a young age, are out there and possibly playing other sports. And Hawaii's really been popular with multiple sport type athletes. So baseball and soccer, and of course football is really, really huge here, with the influence of just the success that, number one, the University of Hawaii has had. And then you see some of the great college players that are from Hawaii that have gone on to play collegiately. And then obviously taking that a step further to get an opportunity to play at the NFL. I think with baseball, it's just one of those things that kids enjoy playing. I mean, it can be rough to try to find opportunities to play by yourself because it is a team sport. You can't just go like to a basketball court and shoot hoops and work on your game there. But I think there's enough male influences and fathers, especially, who love the game, grew up playing it, and now they want to be able to pass it on down to their son, however way that they can. And I think part of that too, Pete, is there's not a lot of big people here, from the physical aspect. And, we don't have a lot of guys that are 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", coming out of the States. So what's the one sport that you could actually play past high school and maybe get college opportunities to further their education and possibly pro? Well, baseball fits kind of that mold. Soccer too, I think, has that. But soccer, we're still a little bit behind compared to, I think, where Europe's at on a world or in a global perspective. But baseball, I think, has always been true here, and especially the guys that have come before me as a player. Like, I looked up to the Mike Fetters of the world, the Sid Fernandez, Mike Lum, who was the very first Hawaii-born player to ever play in the big leagues, was a very close friend of my dad. So I knew Mike from the time I was a little kid. Guys like Len Sakata, who's influenced me and helped me in my career as a young teenager, and then carrying that into collegiately and professionally. So those are the guys that, at least for me, I know I looked up to, and I'm sure there's a lot of guys that did the same. And now the younger generation here, they're looking up to Shane Victorino, they're looking up to Colton Wall, they're looking up to Kurt Suzuki, guys who have been there in the game and doing their thing, that, hey, I can be, or I want to be that, and I can do that because those guys came from the same soil as me.
Yeah, being in Chicago, I got to watch Colton Wong, first with the Cardinals, and then come in and play with Milwaukee now. I mean, there's a great example. I mean, he's a big guy as far as strong. He's very strong, but he's not real tall or anything.
Right.
Unbelievable player. The other part we were talking about a little bit off air, we talked about, Japan. There is an influence of Japanese there in Hawaii. And I'm curious, not only the discipline aspect, but growing up, the culture there, was there the discipline part and the mental toughness? Because there seems to be some mental people coming
Yes.
out of there playing sports.
Yeah, I think we can categorize it that there a lot of people or a lot of athletes, whether it's baseball or football, and even on the female side of the game too, or game or athletics, is there's we kind of have like a chip on our shoulder. You know,
Yeah.
I think we're always kind of like the outsider looking in, but yet, hey, we know that we're confident that we can compete. We know that we can do just as good, even though I may not look and pass the eye test as far as physicality. But we have that grit. We have that mentality that, hey, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I think that's just the culture that we grew up in. And I think a lot of it has to do with athletes raised under the right guidance of their parents who are pushing them, you know, like, hey, you can do this. And, or if you want to do this, you got to work at it. So I think installing a good baseline of work ethic from the time they're young and slowly adding layers over time as they get older, like, hey, this is happening and I see the fruits of my labor and the time that I've spent working on my craft, it's showing up when game time comes. You know, when I'm on the volleyball court, when I'm on the football field, when I'm on the baseball diamond, you know, guys are out there competing, and then those guys start elevating their game. And now with technology and the ability to, you know, basically take a cell phone and video a kid, I can shoot that over to anybody that I feel like I want to. So I think the opportunity for kids now too are really great because of technology and the advancements that we've made, so that kids from here are being seen and getting opportunities past high school.
Absolutely. You know, that's great stuff. And, you know, the other part of this was, as I'm thinking here, when we talk about on the show a lot about coaches, how important coaches education is. And I know you're dealing a lot, you know, at the pro level right now, but you had a lot of volunteers that, you know, were volunteers at that time, you know, that obviously did a pretty good job with a lot of players there. Have you seen a difference of the growth mind, you know, how some coaches are changing at the volunteer level from when you played to now in
Oh,
Hawaii?
100%. And how I see that is when I do go out back into the community, because, you know, I've got friends who've got kids now
Mm-hmm.
that are in that little league level. And, you know, I've been invited to come either run practices or be a part of a practice. And, you know, I've done a lot of off-season lessons with players just through, you know, small world contact, small networking contact, like, hey, you know, can you help my friend? And I get phone numbers here and there. But the questions that the parents are asking me, the questions that the coaches are asking me, you can tell that there is a shift versus, hey, when I grew up, this is how I did it, so this is how it has to be done now. And I think that you see that the evolution of the game in the last 5-10 years at the pro level, and the power and the speed that's come into the game, you know, it has shifted. There is a shift in you know, guerrilla baseball, monster baseball, whatever you want to call it, offensively. But you know, pitchers are getting better too. And
Yeah.
so you tie that with nutrition and technology, better training, more specific training for the individual, because everyone comes in all different forms of shapes and sizes. So we can't cookie cut a lot of things. And I think that's where people are understanding that there's a time and place for the masses to do what traditionalists have done. But now, if we really want to advance each individual and player, sometimes we have to be more specific to what their needs are and to help them grow, so that they're just that they basically can become the best version of themselves instead of just maybe holding them back. But I think at the low cellular level of players and little league coaches and little league players, that's part of development too. You develop them and give them that great baseline, and you teach them not only the game, but you teach them how to play the game. You teach them how to respect the game.
Mm.
How do you respect your teammates? You know, you run things out, you hustle in and off. Like, those are just part of life skills too. And I think we've done a good job as a community to set those behaviors with our players, so that our job becomes easier once we get them at 18 or 21 years old. Instead of, man, they didn't learn this, so we got to repattern them or rechange their mindset and retrain them. But that's part of it too, you know, because everyone comes from different parts of the world, different parts of the country. But I think just the respect factor that these kids have coming into the game, especially the ones that I've seen and been around here in Hawaii, especially every time I come home during the off season, you know, there is a different kind of, and I know I kind of got off on a tangent, but
No, it's all right. Good
there
stuff.
is a different vibe and feel that I think coaches are starting to be a little bit more curious. And that's great, because there's still a lot of this game that I don't know. But if I think that I know everything, I'm never going to have, like you said, that growth mindset. So how can I think that I'm going to advance my career if I just stay stuck in middle ground and think that my way is the only way and keep my blinders on?
Yeah, and great points, because we got to teach young kids that too, that, they've got to change. They've got to try different things. Folks, we're going to get to the hitting part because Keoni brought up a key word and I wrote it down. When I hear key words, I want to make sure we address them. But before we do, the other aspect of this, you hear this a lot on the show. We do talk about, because there is concern. I mean, and there has to be. You have to be open-minded. There is concern at the younger levels in the U.S., in the States, that kids are not, MLB has concerns, USA Baseball has concerns. That's the reason they've got programs out there trying to help coaches and young kids, because you want to keep a kid long-term in the game. You don't want it to be a short-term, 8 years old to 12, and then he's done, and that's
Right.
it. Now, I know this as a kid. If I'm having fun doing what I'm doing, I'm going to keep doing it.
Right.
Sometimes I think there's excuses about, video games and different sports. I get all that. But if I really love baseball, I'm going to stay with it. When I stop is when I'm not being as successful. And that's that 13, 14-year-old age group. So the question I want to bring up, because I think it'll help our coaches and players and parents. Everybody says, Keoni, hey, as a coach with a younger kid, you got to have fun. Okay. And that sounds great. That's a great slogan. Have fun. I love slogans, but I also want results.
Yes.
What does that mean? Have fun.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as the passion side of the game. If kids really do a good job of self-evaluation of what is it that really means and hits me in my heart and hits me right between the eyes, that I love and actually do have a true admiration for something, that's where I think they can get steered off of. And for me, baseball was always a passion from day one. And yes, I enjoyed playing basketball, but basketball was more like, hey, have fun. I didn't really care how well I did, because I didn't care if I was good or not good in basketball. I just wanted to play. And also, it was something for me to do when I had baseball downtime. But I think as kids now, because I know a lot of them are being pulled into one sport specific and training them year round, I think we're kind of playing with a little bit of danger there, only because at what point or at what age should I say that if I've started at 6, 7 years old in baseball and that's all I've done, maybe by that 12, 13-year-old range, man, I'm just burnt out. I'm burnt out because there's never a break. It's, baseball can be boring at times because it's slow paced. And so the interest that these kids have, they're checked out. So unfortunately, with the cell phone and the video game hobby, I guess you could call it, or distraction that they have, they're completely engaged. Those things are really, their minds are so focused on that. So if that brings them joy versus, I don't want to stand on a baseball field for 2 hours and play a game. I may not get a hit. I may not get a ground ball. Who knows? So that's where sometimes I think we have to find that heavy or that good balance of what is too much, because at the end, we don't want to lose kids that are good because they're bored or because they've been burnt out by a certain age. So I think coaches around the country, I think they really need to be a little careful with that. I'm not saying that it's not good, but hey, build in more breaks or find ways to challenge or let kids play other sports. Yeah, they can still play baseball, but I think it's wrong for them to say either you play for my team and that's it, and no other outside distractions. And I don't think that the coach has the player's best interest at heart if he's trying to mandate that. And I don't agree with that.
Yeah,
so hopefully I answered your question in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only do not agree with it, I think science doesn't agree with it. Medical industry doesn't agree with it. And we do keep harping on the show about it, because I think it's important to have that message out there to parents, especially, to understand that let your kids play other sports, because we're talking about, it's not just, yes, they're going to get burned out, but two, physically, they can get hurt mentally. Yes. There's so many different things that can happen if they're not playing multiple sports. And folks, you've heard me say it on the show. We'll say it again. If you look at not just baseball, but there was a study done. It had to be, and I'm paraphrasing, probably 95%. I may be lowballing it. Of major league players were all multi-sport athletes. I interviewed a golf expert, a psychiatrist who works with golfers. And I asked them that question: how many golfers were multi-sport athletes? She said only one was not at the highest level. So there you go. Everybody that thinks, I'm born at 8 years old as a golfer and that's all I do is golf. That's not the case. So it brings up the question also, Keoni, is as a coach, you want your kids to play multi-sports. One of the areas I think you can add to this too is kids got to practice, but not only can the game be boring at times, and for your folks that watch TV that love the game, I understand you love the game, you'll watch it for 5 hours. But when you're playing it as a 5-year-old, as an 8-year-old kid, like Keoni said, if it's boring, they're going to find something else to do. They want a ball hit to them. They want an action. They want to be part of it. So the other part of this is practice, because I can tell you this, I think it's one of the most critical aspects of it. Practice can be extremely boring. And we lose kids because of that. So how about some advice? I'd love to hear some of the things that you think are important to do in practice to make it fun, but yet also make it productive, because they got to produce, right? From practice to game.
Right.
But maybe a little bit about that.
I think part of that, when you break it down as far as, let's say, 6-7-year-old kids, because I think at that age, they can be a little bit more in tune versus a kid who's probably playing at 3, 4, like they're just out there because mom and dad probably signed them up. They don't know what they're doing. My friends have kids that are 5 and 6, and they're telling me, oh my God, it's chaos. But if their kids are having fun, everyone wins, But I think when you become 6, 7, definitely 8 and 9, to keep them involved and keep them engaged, you've got to change things up. If you practice 2-3 times a week as a team, you've got to mix things up, because that's where they get into the redundancy and the monotony of, I show up, I stretch, I play catch, I do this, I do that, I go home. The next day, I show up, I stretch, I play catch, I do this. It becomes too repetitive in a boring way. So, I think you always add an element of competition in there somewhere. Like, hey, at the end, we're going to have a race. We're going to have a race to see, you split the team up into 2 teams. And I remember when I was young, you have one team at home plate and the other team at second, and you run around the bases to see who's the fastest team. It's those little things that may not be exactly baseball geared and teaching the game, but yeah, they're running the bases, but it makes them have fun at the end. It's like, man, that was awesome. Our team won. What's it do? It makes them want to come back the next time. So I think coaches can be really creative. I mean, have to practice really be baseball specific, but then add a competition in there somewhere. And it doesn't have to be geared exactly towards baseball. It could be a throwing competition to see who has, who's the most accurate, or who can block balls the best if you're a catcher. I mean, some of these things, I think we've got to be creative to keep them engaged. And basically at the end of the day, I want my kid, or I want my team and my players to be excited for the next time we practice. The game's always going to be fun because now you're playing against another opponent on the other side. But if we keep those players active, we keep them fresh, we challenge them, we move them around, and you just add a fun element to the game, they're going to want to come back and continue.
Absolutely. And as we talk about this, I wanted to ask you, in Hawaii, just like anywhere else, there's competition when it comes to sports, right? You want kids to play baseball, but yet there's other sports to do. And we want them to play multiple sports. What would be the major competitor in Hawaii? Is it soccer? Is there other sports that kids play there? And I ask that because cross training, that, if you're doing other sports, that can help baseball also. So what are the major sports there?
Football is probably number one. And I think part of that too is, we have a lot of Polynesian influence. We have a lot of Polynesian players. And we've had a lot of successful Polynesian athletes move on from high school to play at the D1 football level. And those guys have gone on to go and play in the NFL, and they've shined. We've got guys like Marcus Mariota, who born and raised here and went to St. Louis High School, went to University of Oregon, Heisman Trophy winner. And, now he's in the NFL. Like, those guys, Tua Tagovailoa, we've had guys recently who have set the bar high, yes, in college, but they've also set the bar high when they become, NFL players. And so I think the more that you see that on TV, and our news here has done a tremendous job following all of our athletes once they get past high school, like, hey, this is what this guy's doing. This is where he's at. This is, he's doing his thing. So kids don't lose sight and they don't lose touch of, well, whatever happened to that guy that graduated from this high school? I don't hear about him anymore. Right. Well, our news does a really good job to stay on top of those athletes, and I commend all the news stations plus the newspaper. writers for those guys to stay on top of it, because it is part of who we are. And then you think about the University of Hawaii, that's the top of what we have when it comes to athletics. That's our pro team. And so when the university has success, those kids become a little bit more influenced. Like, man, I want to play football for the University of Hawaii, or I want to play volleyball. You know, volleyball is really, really popular, both men's and women's. And so it gets those kids, their attention, because it's like, wow, those guys are doing it at the next level. Why can't I do it? Why not? Why can't that be me one day? So I think it helps it helps plant the seed that things can be done, because I've seen people from here go on and move it. But football is probably number one. I'd say baseball and soccer maybe number two, but definitely baseball, in a sense that there's a lot of opportunities for kids to move on past high school baseball, whether it's D1, D2, D3, JUCO. And I think kids are tapping into that. It's not just only D1 or I don't play. No, there's a lot of schools out there, but got to do your research. You got to try to make connections out there. And I think there's a lot of athletes that maybe they don't give themselves the best opportunity to move past high school, because they don't go out and try to seek maybe opportunities when there is a lot of opportunities for them to continue their baseball career. But I always tell the kids, hey, you are a student athlete first. So remember that, like, take care of what you got to take care of in the classroom. So those opportunities to play at the next level, a coach can look at your transcript and say, yeah, this kid can get into my school, versus, you know what, I have to move on because he's not taking care of what he needs to take care of in the class.
I love looking at states, countries that are producing players at the higher levels, and obviously through education, through colleges. And I think I love looking at that because, you and I were talking off the air, and I told you that Cuba, people think there's millions of players there. Well, there's about 60,000 that, basically play, but they're producing some unbelievable players. Hawaii, we just talked about that. Not a big population, but they're producing some very good players. So it's great to look at that. Now, you went through 11-year career playing. Then in 2012, you got into coaching with the Pirates. I want to jump into that because I think, the process of going from player to coach. Now you have an advantage, obviously with your dad, a lot of things that you studied with him, you learned from him and all that, and your grandfather and some others. How was that transition? Because for a lot of, just because you played the game, you hear this, doesn't mean you can coach the game. Right. Now, it's a huge advantage, no doubt, if you played, it gives you experience. But coaching and playing are two different things, and you got to kind of mesh those together. Talk about the transition period you had, the difficulties and maybe the benefits on both sides.
Yeah, for sure. It's, my so-called playing career ended when I was 31 years old, and I was just grateful that I had opportunity to play that long. Yeah, I never reached my goal of playing the major leagues, but looking back, like I'm okay with that. I knew where I stood. I gave it my all. I had opportunities. I just, at the end of the day, Pete, I wasn't good enough. If I was, I would have had a chance. But I know deep down in my heart, I did everything I possibly could to try to reach that goal. And I was just very fortunate that organizations gave me that opportunity. But I always knew when I was done playing that I wanted to stay involved in the game. Number one, because of, my family and everything that I grew up in, and the household that I grew up in, and the legacy that my family, my dad, my grandfather, my great grandfather had laid for me. But the game has given me so much at 31 years old, at that time. And I've been able to travel around the world. I've been able to travel around the country as an amateur, as a pro, because of baseball. And so the way that I also looked at it was, how can I give back to the game that has given me so much? Put my ego aside. It's not about me anymore. It's not about my playing career. How can I help the next kid who has the same goals and same dreams that I once had? How can I maybe help him along his journey to hopefully maybe one day reach the major leagues and get a chance there and be a small part of his influence, I guess you can say, and hopefully impact him the right way. And so talking with my mom and dad, like, I think I'm ready to make that next transition. And so what I did was I decided, okay, either I'm going to go the professional baseball route or maybe go collegiately. But if I went collegiately, I was going to have to go back to the University of Arizona, finish my degree so that technically I could get a full-time job. And I was willing to do that. What do I go pro or do I go collegiately? But at that time I was like, pro ball is still fresh. The connections and the people that I have been in my corner for a long time, I'm going to use them as resources to see. And if not, then I could always go back to college, be the 31, 32-year-old guy back on campus trying to get his degrees, but tether that into hopefully a coaching career. And so I emailed all 30 teams at the time in 2011. Some of them I had relationships with people in the front office, and Pittsburgh was one of the first teams to really contact me back after it got sent out. We had chatted a little bit just through email, and then finally a couple of weeks after that, they picked up the phone and they called and said, "Hey, are you still looking for a job opportunity?" I said, "Yes." And so we kind of did a short phone conversation, interview, I guess you could say. And the next day they called back and said, "We want to bring you in." And so going into the 2012 season, I didn't know what my role was going to be. They had told me, they're like, "Hey, we're not going to categorize you as a hitting coach or a manager. We're going to bring you in. And then at some point, we're going to fill you in as a fourth coach," which I thought was a great transition. Instead of just giving me a lot of responsibility, be a part of the staff, but also see and observe how pro ball coaching is. And my God, I couldn't believe what I didn't know once I stepped in that coaching realm. I thought I knew a lot because the experience that I've had and the influences of other people. But when you get into a coaching setting, I'm sure it would have been the same if I went collegially, but you get into a coaching setting, you're like, oh my God, there's so many different variables that come into play, things I got to worry about. But it was a good starting point for me to get going. And so I stayed in rookie ball that year, which is the perfect level. So if I made some mistakes, it didn't maybe look as bad as versus coaching guys who are in AA, AAA. And I just kind of took with it and ran. And I had really great coaches that first year that helped me start my journey and add more layers to my background. And they poured into me like as if I was their son, but helping me, guiding me. And I asked a lot of questions because there was things that came up that I really didn't know. And so that's kind of how Pittsburgh allowed me and gave me, and so grateful that they gave me that platform from the get-go. And I couldn't have asked for a better organization to have hired me from the start, because of just the leaders and the people that they had there really helped shape and form and mold me to give me that solid baseline and slowly add it over time. And that's where I'm at right now. So that's kind of how
one of the great leaders, Clint Hurdle.
Yes.
He's been on a show a couple times. Unbelievable gentleman. And I say this because, the Pirates being very progressive, outside the box thinkers, incredible training methods that they have. So you hit a period where that change was happening in coaching a little bit, where it was more open-minded and younger people were coming into the game of coaching. At one time, you wouldn't see a lot of young people. It'd be the old school, right. The old boys network, you hire your friends, yeah. Right? We're all the same age.
Yes.
That had to be incredible. What's your advice there when you did all this? What's your advice to coaches? You mentioned a couple of them, but I want to see what the most important, when a player's making a transition from professional player or even collegiate player to coaching, maybe some advice there for our coaches.
Yeah, I think number one was you got to be open-minded and you got to have a growth mindset. And what I mean by that is take what you've learned, take what you know, keep that in your back pocket, because that gives you a solid baseline and a foundation. But once you step into that coaching realm, really absorb and take in other things that other coaches have done, because they've got the experience now on the coaching side of the game. So if I were to give anyone advice, that'd be number one: be open-minded, keep your scope wide, take your blinders off, and just learn and listen, ask questions, wait to speak, instead of thinking, well, I want to put my name and put my stamp on this, and I want to act like I know what I'm talking about, so I'm going to interrupt. Right. Wait till your opportunity comes, because it will come, and coaches will completely guide you the right way and be like, hey man, I appreciate what you have to say. Or when the time comes, they're going to ask you for your opinion. They're going to ask you for your advice, and players are going to do that. But always make sure that you leave your ego at the door. You check it at the door before you walk into a major league clubhouse or a pro baseball clubhouse. And although you are building a library of information and knowledge and everything, you want to still be able to take all that great wisdom that other people have around you, because they're there for a reason as well. And so you take that in, write things down, take a notebook and things that you learned for that day, things that you liked, or hey, I didn't really like this, but here's maybe how I would do it differently if I was in a certain position.
Hmm.
and you build up this library of notes over time. And it's like, wow, man, I've gained so much in which you may think is a short amount of time, but the influences, all these, these checkpoints throughout the course of that year or that month or whatever it may be, they start to add up,
Man, coaches, great advice. I mean, talk about trying to speed up your education and maybe not make as many mistakes, because we're all going to make mistakes, but not make as many mistakes in coaching. This is why we do the podcast, because I think it can really help a lot of younger coaches who are getting into coaching. All of a sudden now, here you are with another great organization, the Kansas City Royals. Incredible. I love these teams, the Royals, the A's, the teams that don't have a lot of budget, but they've got a great organization from top to down, to bottom. You're the assistant hitting coordinator. It's interesting to understand the system of hitting throughout the organization. It could be a show in itself, I understand, but what does a system look like? How do you keep the consistency throughout the whole system? And is it an open system where you can say what you want all the time, and tell your guys, hey, I think we should do it this way? How does that work?
I think that definitely is part of it. Drew Saylor, who's my right-hand man, I'm his assistant. He came in at the exact same time that I did back in 2019. And under the director or our direct leadership of Alex Zumwalt, who's our director of hitting, I think there was a shift in focus on where we wanted to take our hitting department. Prior to that year, the organization as a whole, at the minor league level, wasn't very good. We're at the bottom of a lot of offensive categories, very good and top in stolen base attempts and stolen bases. And that's what Kansas City ball is. You have these athletic players who can run, and they'll create opportunities for you to score. Well, we weren't probably, in our opinion, I guess they weren't producing the type of players that we were hoping to, kind of shift forward and move to the major leagues. So when we came on staff, Alec basically directed us and said, hey, this is where we're at. These are the things that we did, but we need new ways of thinking. We need new ways of training. We need influential people guiding our own people, whether it's our hitting coaches who are there, and also obviously our players. And, and that, I think, Pete, number one, and you have to build trust. You start with trust in the people that you work with and the people that you work for. And so it is systematic from the top down. Our owner, Mr. Sherman, and then you talk about Dayton Moore, who's overseeing everything that we got under one umbrella. But when you hire the right people, things start to flow that much better. And when you have communication from the top all the way down to the bottom, everyone's equal, and everyone is treated equal. And I think when you have that great culture with the staff, and the players see that, they want to be a part of it, and they start to buy in a little bit more, because the message, like you said, the message does need to be clear. And I think we've done a good job laying out not opportunities, but I think we've done a great job of laying out a somewhat game plan for our players, our organization, our hitting department. And we just kind of set the boundaries, and we set the foundation on what it is that we're looking for and how we're going to train, and what we want our players to think, and then obviously build confidence off of that. And so I think we've done a really good job creating a systematic process, and that's what it is. The process that we have in place, we feel is the right process, and we're going to go from there. And we're going to see at the end of the year if it worked out, and if it did, great. We're going to add to it. If it didn't, then we'll adjust, and we'll make necessary adjustments moving into the 2022 season. So it's finally come to fruition. Last night was our first minor league game since 2019 officially. So this has been about 18, 19 months in the making to see our coaches and our players go out and do their thing. And we get to sit back and kind of watch and help them along the way. So hopefully I answered the question in what you were seeking, but I think that's where communication, building trust, open line of communication, asking people for their advice, asking people for their opinion versus, well, I'm going to do it because I'm this guy and I'm not going to let other people influence. And I think when you have that open dialogue, you take in information, and eventually you become, if you're that guy that has to make a decision on something, you go ahead because you know where everyone else and what the room is thinking and feeling.
Yeah, and if you listen to Dayton Moore, I've listened to him a couple of times. I was on a Zoom call one time. You could tell the quality, the quality person that he is, and you can see that when you listen to players talk on TV, how much they like the organization because of how they're treated. I think those are all awesome points. Now, without giving up trade secrets, I get it, because you can't, I mean, there's technology, there's things you do.
Right.
But it's interesting to understand some of the changes you're talking about that you guys made offensively. Can you give us some of them to kind of get an idea? Because it could relate to, youth baseball, high school, college. And you know what I'm going to tell you. I love that Kansas City hits the ball all over the place and does certain things that they call it the small game, but there's a lot more than just a small game.
Right. Well, I think the advancement of technology and data has entered the game, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and information now, Peter, everyone's got it. Everyone has the
Yep.
same information. It's not that one organization or two organizations has more information. All the information is shared amongst all the teams based on the companies that are collecting the information. Where teams separate themselves, I believe, is how you take that information and then you apply it to the people and the staff that you have. Because you could get drowned with so much information that's out there. Well, what is relevant, what is not relevant? And then, so I think what we've done is we've added, some of the technology, because prior to coming on staff here, technology and data was there, but it was a small part of the organization and maybe kind of an afterthought. But now that since 2019 moving forward, we've shared and we've been able to collaborate and show our players plus staff members like, hey, this is what the information is telling us. How can we leverage that so that it becomes, number one, simple to use, two, be the ability to understand it, and then three, obviously, how do we apply it? And players come in all different shapes and forms, and their learning aptitude ranges too. I mean, we've got guys that can take information and run with it and not get caught up in it. And then we've got some players who, man, we've got to really keep it at an elementary level, because if not, their mind is going to start to spin. But we have to plant that seed with them. So hopefully, as they grow in our system, those guys that fall into the very elementary level, maybe by the end of the year, they become intermediate level without them even realizing that it happens. But it happens organically because we're sharing the same information day in and day out. And now they become curious. Hey, what does this mean? I'm seeing this, or this looks like I could do this now because of my experience, as the more traction you get in the game. And so I think that was one influence that we did, was taking the technology, taking the data, applying it, but making sure that everyone's on board and understands it first and foremost, instead of here it is, figure it out. We've trained a little bit differently. We want to get our guys to be more apt to game speed, because that's what you're going to face at 7:00. We've ramped up that process. I think it's been great. It's challenging, because players, they're kind of traditionalists. They want to do things their way because it feels good. Well, hey, there's a time for feel good, but man, we gotta get ready. We gotta get good for this game, because that's what counts. I don't care how good you look in BP. That doesn't tell me anything. Can you produce when 7:00 comes around? That's what we want. We want our process to drive our results at the end. Results is the last thing. But if our process and everything is done the right way, the results will be there. And that's where we really got to let our kids know, hey, we're not always looking at your batting average. We're not always looking at your RBIs. We're looking at the whole picture of what you're doing, your hard hit percentage, how well do you control the strike zone? Are you swinging and missing a lot? Are you chasing out of the zone? Things like that, in that nature. So kids don't get so caught up in, man, I'm only hitting 240. Hey, yeah, you're hitting 240, but did you realize that you're doing a lot of other good things? Or, hey, you're hitting 310, but man, you're getting a lot of lucky hits. How can we improve and keep your average and maybe make it better so that you produce more based on what your skill set is telling us that you're capable of doing?
Yeah, and folks, as you notice, we jumped into hitting. That's we're going to finish with the hitting part, because I think there's a lot of good nuggets that we can learn here that can help coaches with hitting. Hitting, being the most difficult thing in the sport, obviously. And you mentioned earlier in the show, this is where I love that you said game speed, because I think that's what we lack a lot of times. And you mentioned batting practice. Not only at 50 miles an hour, not only do you feel good possibly, but what about, I threw BP and, my ball would move a little bit. I wasn't very good at it. And I had pro guys. I had some big league guys, in independent ball. And they wanted it right down the middle, right? Now my better hitters could hit it all over the strike zone. I mean, they weren't worried about that. But, at the same time, I could have throwing 50 miles an hour. I could have a bad BP too, because what happens if I don't hit the ball well? How does that feel mentally going into the game? Right. So there's that aspect of it. So I love the game speed. So what I want to get to is earlier, and you could add anything you like here, Keoni. earlier you said pitchers are advancing, I think, and that's the big issue nowadays. And then on television, hitters
Mhm.
seem to be behind. So I'd love to hear for our coaches, because of the velocity of pitchers and the movement and the different pitches that are moving and the tunneling and all this stuff, they've
Yeah,
got a huge advantage.
correct.
Talk about it at the highest level, but also kind of related to the young levels too, because now we got young kids throwing hard, so the hitters have to make adjustment. What are you guys doing to help your hitters?
I think we're preparing them. We're preparing them that much better as far as think of the game as the test. All the preparation that we want them to do prior is to be, ready to go. Like I said, at 7 o'clock. But if I just go through the motions and I do my underhand flips and I do my BP, again, it gets back to that feel good. Well, all of a sudden, if I don't know what this pitcher is featuring, I'm at a disadvantage. I'm going up to the plate basically blinded, hoping that I have some kind of success to get the results that I want. Again, being able to have information, like I said, it's not proprietary anymore. Everyone has information on the opposing players, and they got information on us as well. So there's no secret. And I think how we try to prepare our players for that night's starter, let alone the remainder, the rest of the bullpen for whatever series that we have, I think it gives us a slight advantage so that our players have an understanding of what to expect when they step in that box. And it's not just, well, man, I didn't know he had a changeup. Well, I didn't know his fastball moved like this. I didn't know his breaking ball was like this. So we have been able to help influence our players and teach them basically what pitch profile is. What do these pitchers have? What do they do well with? Here's their strengths. Here's your strengths. And we've been able to kind of tether it together so they have an idea or a plan the moment they step in the box.
Now, you guys have an advantage because you got all the technology, you got the research, but you also have, the history. I mean, there's so many games you're playing against some of these teams consistently. Right. So you pretty much know all the players really well. Now, in saying that, you're still seeing guys struggle because pitching seems to be more advanced. What do you do with the younger guys, the high school, colleges, depending what college you're at? What's some advice, I guess? If I'm a hitter, what do I do to catch up to, training wise? Does it become a visual thing? Do I now increase my visual training, or is it a timing? What can I do as a young player or a coach to help my players?
Pete, I think it's what you said right there. And I think it just depends on the player. I think coaches that are knowledgeable, not just of information, but basically what are they seeing over time, right? The more information, and what I mean by information is the more I watch a player hit, let's say for a 2-week span, I kind of have a pretty good idea on why either he's having success or probably why he's not having success. And I think when you see guys spiraling down or spiraling out when they're struggling, a lot of it is what's going on between their ears. And you see one at bat carry over into the next at bat. You see a bad call affect his emotional state. You see a pitcher execute maybe 3 really good pitches. It can be deflating to the player when it comes to his confidence. And when you lose confidence, you don't have confidence. It's really hard to go up there thinking that you're gonna switch, turn the switch back on. It's like, man, I'm a bad guy. I'm a bad player. Like, I'm good. Like, I can do this. It's really hard. So I think, again, starting back with building trust with the player, if you have that foundation already, you can go up to the player and start asking, hey, take away the last 2 weeks of your at-bats. Yeah, we know you're struggling. Walk me through your thought process, because that's where we sometimes have to become psychologists. We got to be dad. We got to be big brothers. We got to be friends. Sometimes they need tough love. We got to kick them in the butt. Sometimes we got to, put a soft touch on their shoulder and let them know that it's going to be okay. Because I've been there as a player. I was the emotional wreck at times. And, sometimes I didn't know what was up, what was down, what was going on, but I didn't have the coaches that I could really lean on for support. The game has changed in that way. People want coaches to be more relational. I think it's a good thing. You get close to them because eventually it's their career and you want them to be able to share things and not hold things back, because that may hinder them from reaching their potential or reaching their ceiling. So when you build that trust with the player, it gives you the credibility to go up to him and say, hey, man, what do you got? And if he trusts you, what's he going to do? He's going to open up. Yeah. So when you start peeling back that onion, and all of a sudden, man, there's some deep things going on. Hell, man, what if the guy just broke up with his girlfriend 2 weeks ago? He's worried about that. He's not worried about competing at 7 o'clock. So when you start having, and you put all these different variables together, a lot of times, Pete, it's not based on what their mechanics are doing. It's what's going on in their thought process that's not allowing their skills to shine. And now that affects maybe what it looks like in the box or, or on the mound. So really getting to the root and getting to the heart of what's happening in here in their heart. And then obviously what is that tied this way, and is it transitioning the right way? Because if this isn't right and if the heart isn't right, good luck, especially in baseball, because they're going to keep coming at you. And pitchers don't care if you're struggling. They're not going to throw balls right down the middle to get your confidence up. They're trying to get you out.
Yeah.
And so,
And that's great advice also from what you said earlier, transitioning into a coach, because, especially transitioning a coach into pro ball, because that could be intimidating. I remember my first time in independent ball, I was like, wow, these guys are triple A, double A guys, big league guys. Like, what am I going to do here? So that's great advice for coaches also. You're teaching each player individually according to their needs.
mm-hmm.
So does batting practice look like that? Is there different things you're doing batting practice? Because, or we hear a lot about, traditional batting practice is okay to get loose, but it really doesn't prepare you for the game. So is there something you guys do differently there at the minor league levels or at the big league level?
Yeah, I mean, we have challenge BP from time to time. That could even be something in a batting cage. I know I started doing that with Pittsburgh a couple years ago. To kind of challenge guys a little bit more, even if it was with flips, adding velocity or adding different change in speeds, because we've got to get their bodies ready to move the way that we want them to move when you're facing 93, 95 miles per hour, when guys got really good sliders and with late bite. The feel good BP is there, but also, we want to challenge them. And even if it is fastballs, maybe we may ask a coach to, hey, let's move you up closer to home plate so that you shorten the timing window. And kids, if you let the kids know why you're doing certain things, it's a lot easier for them to say, okay, I get it, versus why are they doing this? They're not telling me anything and I don't like it. So, we don't want them to kind of check out. But if you have a reason for why you're doing certain things, it's a lot easier on their end to say, I may not like it, but I understand why we're doing it. And hopefully over time, they like it because they know, man, this is what's getting me ready for the game. Yeah. And so I don't think it's a secret out there, but I think organizations do things differently. But influences with and utilizing machines too, man. Machines, there's only so many bullets in my arm throwing, but machines are valuable to challenge with breaking balls, to challenge with fastballs. And you got to be able to train high leverage velocity and shapes and of pitches, because that's what they're going to see. That's what they're going to see. If they don't like it, sorry, but we're in the long run, we know this is better for you, so that the guy on the mound, when you do face him, it's not like, oh my gosh, this is completely overwhelming.
I got to believe as a player or as an organization, vision and, it's evolving, the training aspect of vision. It's getting better and better. You got to believe that it's the most important part to start with, because it affects the brain, obviously. The brain controls everything. Do you guys, in the off season, players obviously, hopefully, are training their vision on their own, or they have programs for them. But how heavily is that involved in an organization when it comes to the vision aspect of it?
I think it's still, I don't want to say it's new, but I think it's sometimes, depending on the organization, it might be an afterthought. I think there are organizations out there that believe in it, think that it is maybe something that we can train, or we can find, small margins to help influence them and get the players a little bit better, because 2-3% increase over your opponent is in the long run is going to help in something with vision, because it starts with your eyes. If you can't see clearly, if you can't see well, I don't care what your skills look like in BP or fielding ground balls and throwing across the diamond, your eyes sends the signal to your brain, and which then tells the signal from your brain to your body how to move and how to adapt. There's still a huge science part to it, and I'm definitely not credible to talk about any of that. But it does start with your eyes being able, number one, can you see clearly? And I think there are some kids out there that don't think of it as in being important until it's like, man, I'm having a tough time seeing at night. Well, how are your eyes? Oh, they're good. But unless you actually put them down in front of an optometrist to get their eyes checked, that can be a huge difference or a separator for guys by the time, especially at night games, because you're playing these minor league parks, not all their lights are good. So any advantage that you can see visually is only going to help you be a little bit more competitive.
And yesterday, and a great example of that, yesterday I was listening to a show with a top visual expert. He was working, I won't mention the place, but he's working with a particular college. And it's an amazing statistic. 40% of the players on that college team ever in their life have gone to a doctor to check their eyes. Forget about sports.
Yeah,
they never check their eyes. And it's just amazing to me, because that's why I think it is new for baseball in some ways, even though there are programs that have visual training programs in their system, but it's kind of new from the fact that not everybody's doing it. But you just like you said, that has to be the most important part of it. The second part that affects that, once you're talking about the vision part, and we've got I know you've got a schedule, we got about 10 more minutes. Are you good for 10 more minutes?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I want to make sure, because I forgot you had something, another Zoom. The other aspect of this is, one is picking up the ball, but two, and how it's teachable, is the timing aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how young coaches can work on the timing of their players, or teach them how to time the ball better?
Yeah, timing and rhythm is a hard thing sometimes to teach, because timing and rhythm comes from basically your cognitive ability on what your brain can process. Because you look at guys that can dance and you look at guys that can't dance. I mean, that's rhythm. And then obviously you add the timing component of trying to hit a ball that's moving, and you only have less than 0.4 of a second to make a decision on whether to swing, not swing. Is it a strike? Is it a ball? Is it in the zone? There's in the zone that I want. I mean, there's so many different variables that come into actually hitting a moving object. Even at in the young ages, the little league ages, like an 8-year-old kid's got to face a guy that is throwing a ball that moves. And so, the timing and rhythm, I think the more opportunities that kids can stand in, number one, to see and track a live pitch out of an arm, the better they're going to be off. The more that a kid can see and train off of a machine, whether it's a breaking ball machine or a fastball machine, he's going to be able to square up and time that pitch a little bit more and a little bit more consistently. Because if all he does is train off of a tee and that ain't moving, all of a sudden you're asking him to hit something that's an object that's coming at them with velocity and not knowing what it is, it's really hard. But I think the more that these kids see from a live arm, challenging them, they're going to be able to start getting into a little bit more of a timing situation that's going to not be so far off. And I think timing comes with mechanics too. If kids have big moves, big leg kicks and hitches in their hands, and and they get long, when they get to touch their toe touch and heel plant, if their hands and stuff are in a tougher position, their timing could be off, because now it's going to take them more time to get to contact. So I think when young kids have a solid foundation of smaller movements, less moving parts, it's going to allow them to be on time more consistently. Now you look at guys like Javi Baez, you got, guys like Bryce Harper. I won't get into their movement patterns and how they do, why they do, but with those big movements, there may come on the back end a lot of swing and miss, because they're not timed up as much as maybe they could if it were to be smaller. Those are just some of the things that, we notice and we watch and we try to talk about. But if we know players are not on time, we ask them, why do they think they're not on time? Is it because you're not picking up the pitcher early? You're not seeing the ball out of the hand? Or are you anticipating versus are you trying to make a decision once ball's in flight? And that we all know, if I'm waiting to see what the pitch is and then decide to swing, more times than not, I'm going to be late. And so...
Man, that's great, man. I tell you, because, and I know this could be a 5 to 10 hour show when you think about it, just on hitting. And I want to ask you this. Do you think we're not at the younger levels, because you hear this a lot. Yes, they got to learn how to do the fastball, but it seems like later on, as they get a little older, the off-speed pitches is what really gives them trouble. At the big league level, may be a little different, but at the younger kids, are we not training them enough to learn how to hit slow pitching also, or curveballs or changeups?
Yeah, I think so, because again, how are they practicing that? My dad used to throw me curveballs and breaking balls, and I had a dad that could do that. How many parents out there could do what he did and throw it for strikes and be consistent with it? So it's hard enough to just go straight batting practice.
Yeah.
For some coaches, I struggled with it my first year coaching. I was awful with batting practice and I was embarrassed. But anyways, that's a whole other story. But now, kids don't see it. And so when the game time comes and kids are working on it because they're pitchers, they're throwing different breaking balls and throwing changeups and off speed, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you don't see it. But also at the same time, okay, well, if they're throwing those pitches, number one, are they throwing them for strikes? Or two, what are you doing with the fastballs that you do get that you should be hitting? And sometimes, especially, once you get to college level, the opportunities to get mistake pitches down the middle of the plate, they're not as much. And then when you get to pro ball, same thing. It gets smaller and smaller of, hey, I got 3 fastballs in the zone. I missed all 3. Well, that's out. You may not get 3 anymore every single time up. So being able to hit, number one, first and foremost, got to be able to hit a fastball. Then after that, the more that you see and you recognize off-speed pitches, it becomes a little bit easier. But I've never ran into a hitter, even to this day, it's like, man, I was a great breaking ball hitter. I was a great changeup hitter. Guys are like, man, I want to hit number one. Unfortunately, you look at the big leagues, the pitch usages of fastball to off-speed pitches, it's not 70-30 anymore, where 70's fastball and 30% breaking ball. It's getting close to, it's almost 50-50, if not maybe trending more on the breaking ball side, because it is harder to hit. And guys can hit 95 and above. And I think some pitchers are scared that they don't want to get hit off a fastball. They would rather get a guy to try to chase a breaking ball pitch out of the zone versus, hey, I just, challenged him with 95 and now he's putting it in the upper deck and left center field. I think there's still that part that guys don't want to necessarily always give it in, even though they've got high end velocity. So
yeah, you are seeing more of that. Is there, you mentioned earlier, you got to train them younger to obviously get better as they get older, because if you wait till they're old, it's tough to do that. In a minor league system, you guys use pitchers for batting practice at times, and what you're teaching in the minors obviously is what you want them to do in the big leagues. Is there more of hit the ball where it's pitched, situational hitting? Does Kansas City do that more than, because it seems like they do, but when you watch the big league club?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, guys know what the situation is at hand prior to getting in the box, but we're trying to get our guys to believe that, hey, when you have the right plan going into that situation, you're going to have more success over time if you can stick to it, just like anything else. Mm-hmm. If I stick to my plan, whether I have a runner on third less than 2, or I have bases loaded, or I have nobody on, nobody out, if I stick to my plan, I'm going to probably, over the course of 450, 500 at-bats in the minor leagues, I'm going to have some success. It's when the situation dictates my emotional state, and now it's like, I have to get this job done. I have to do this. That's when we lose what our preparation is trying to teach us, and we get too swing happy. Then we chase that first pitch fastball that's up, or we chase that breaking ball that bounces in the dirt because I'm so worried about not getting the job done. You'll get the job done, but take the base runners out of the equation. You have a job to do, and if you hit the ball hard, and that's what we want our guys to do, is when you hit the ball hard, the chance of you having success is going to go up. But trust in your process, trust in what you have to do in that task for that at bat, and over time it's going to play out. And if the guy doesn't give you a pitch to hit, take your walk, get on base, because that's what you want. You want guys on base, because at the end of the day, you want to outscore the other opponent. In order to do that, you got to have base runners. But if I'm going up there and I abandon my plan, and I try to chase the result, usually that doesn't end up in my favor.
Do you guys use? And I kind of mixed in 2 questions in there. Do you guys use pitchers for batting practice? Is that
no? We don't use pitchers for batting practice. We don't. Okay. We just don't have the arms to do it. I mean, those guys got to be ready to pitch when game time comes. So
makes sense. Makes sense. Now, we got a couple more things, and then we'll close it off, Keoni. This has been fantastic. I knew it was going to be. When I looked at your background and then we talked off the air, I knew this was going to be outstanding. The other area, I guess I wanted to kind of close it off with, you see here in Chicago, we've got Anthony Rizzo, power hitter, but yet he'll choke up with 2 strikes, and he'll try to get the ball in play or hit a liner somewhere. You don't see as much of that in the major leagues anymore. What's the reason for that? I know that some teams are changing. I've seen more players do it, but what's the reason for that, you think?
I think there comes that's a really good question. I think it depends on, number one, the individual and what the individual believes. I think Rizzo is a really prime example that, if his mentality is, I got to get the job done any which way, and if I have to choke up, if I have to stay on the plate, if I got to battle and fight pitches off. That's his mentality, and that's what makes him so good. I think that there has been a shift because, number one, the single isn't sexy anymore. I think guys want to hit doubles and home runs because that's what gets them noticed on ESPN and Baseball Tonight and, and all of those things. So I think some guys have shifted away from, hey, a ground ball to second with the runner on third, less than 2 at the infield back, I get an RBI. But does that make the highlight reel? Probably not.
Right.
And so I think it just depends on where guys are at. Whereas I remember reading an article early in the 2013, 2014 about this shift. And I think some of the power guys were saying, well, I'm better off giving myself an opportunity to drive the ball either in the gap or out of the park with 3 swings. And if I don't, then I don't. Versus, well, let me just hit a weak ground ball or a weak ball in play. I may or may not get the job done, but that's not who I am. That's not what I get paid for. And I think that's where, the influence of salaries and what guys are making based on production. Shoot, I mean, if I could hit a 3-run home run and give myself 3 swings versus I could just get 1 RBI and I'm out, guys are going to probably take the risk and the chance of, well, let me try to hit the 3-run home run. Yeah. And I think that's where it's influenced. And I think a lot of it just depends on the organization and the hitting philosophy that they want to ingrain in their players. And so, we value the tool set of what the player has. Know who you are. I was never a power guy, never would be. So why should I go up there looking to try to hit a 2-run home run versus if I hit a line drive, I get the run in and I'm on base. And now the next guy does his job to try to get me in based on what he is capable of doing. And so I think you see a lot of guys who are trying to play the long ball and do the long ball thing, but they're not the long ball guy. Stick to who you are because that's what got you that opportunity. You're more valuable doing what you can versus trying to be someone that you're not.
This will be a great way to end the show. We'll go all the way back to your dad because one, I want you to kind of mention some of the things your dad has done for the game of baseball early on, especially with the research. But it relates to what we're talking about because we're talking about vision, timing. But then the question is, if guys are throwing harder, do I need to create more bat speed?
Mm-hmm.
Can I create bat speed? How can I do it? Because your dad did some research also on this, not just the weight of balls, but the bat speed. Be cool to kind of close it off with talking about this part.
Yeah, so bat speed is important, but it's not really the end all be all. Because if you can't get to your bat speed, you're not really going to be able to produce what it is that you can do. So, and where I'm going with this is when my dad did the study for the overload underload. Back in the day, it was basically you take, all the, the donuts and the weights that these guys put on their bats. That doesn't actually give you faster bat speed if that's what you're seeking. It's kind of a placebo where you add a weight on it. Yeah, the bat feels heavier. I take it off. Oh, of course it's going to feel lighter because you just took off 16, 18 ounces of weight off of your bat, but it doesn't mean you're swinging faster. And so what the research that he did, to kind of, like you said, paraphrase is, all you really need to do is have a bat that's probably 2 ounces heavier than what you normally would swing at, and a bat that's 2 ounces lighter than what you train at. Because when you start training heavier, you're actually influencing what your swing is actually trying to do. So you're manipulating your swing a little bit more. And so if there's an off-season program that allows you to work, maybe it's 2 or 3 months. I don't remember exactly the right protocols, but you do train and swing with a bat that's only 2 ounces heavier than what you normally would. And then you also influence and use the underload because you're activating your quick twitch muscle fibers. So pairing that up, there is a program that they did that they found that would help increase bat speed. Well, on the other side, Pete, is if I can get my bat speed up to like 74 miles per hour, but I can't accelerate my body the right way to get to the 74 mile per hour bat speed, I'm leaving more on the table. So there's other ways that I need to think as far as what's more influential. Yeah, he's got great bat speed, but he still can't hit 90 miles per hour. Well, why is that? Well, it's probably part of his kinetic link and his kinetic chain. The body's not working the right way to get to that top end speed. And as we know from golf too, you do everything from the ground up. The ground gives you forces that transitions up into your legs, into your hips, into your trunk, into your arms, and then eventually into the club. Well, it's the same process when you hit. If I don't transition all that energy the right way kinetically, I'm never going to get to my 74 mile per hour bat speed. I'm going to only get to like 65, and all of a sudden here comes velocity, and I can't make contact. So that speed is great, but it's not the end all be all. How can I basically use, and we use a device called Blast, and Blast gives us information on rotational acceleration, and that's what's important to see how well you're accelerating to get to that bat speed.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because off the air we talked about the technology. The technology is so good. You just got to learn to understand it, apply it, and as coaches, it can help us, speed up the process. Because I remember in the old days, I mean, we had to guess. I mean,
Yeah.
and if the player was doing well, great. I mean, that's good. We might have guessed right, but now we can speed that process up so much more. Right, Keoni, I got to tell you, I want to thank you. This has been awesome. And we could keep going. I got to get you back on the show because as you're talking, I got a lot more questions. But again, respect the time of that you have. You have another Zoom call. Thanks again for joining us. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. And hopefully, I've answered all the questions that you had. And, I just want to be able to grow the game as much as and as best as I possibly can, especially here in Honolulu. And thank you for having me on the show. But also know that there's been a lot of people who've poured into me overall for the last 42 years of my life that have influenced me and impacted me in so many ways. And now I'm just taking everything that they've given me and hopefully give it back to, whoever wants it, and including obviously my players in the organization, but also people who just want to learn. My way is not the only way. There's a lot of really good things and a lot of good people that are out there that have relatively really good information. And I want to keep learning from those people well too, so I can add that to my tool belt. But thank you, Pete, for having me on.
Yeah, I love that thinking, man. Keep it up. And you're definitely representing the state of Hawaii, the city of Honolulu, and the Kansas City Royals really well. And this was our first time that we met, so I could tell that just from our first meeting off air and on air. So I think, again, I want to wish you the best. Thank you again. Hey, folks, again, Keoni DeRenne. Special thanks to him, and special thanks to Brian Crock, our producer with the Lineup Media Group. Of course, special thanks to our listeners. You guys and gals are the ones that get the show out. Over 100 countries are listening. Thank you to ESPN Honolulu. And again, remember, mahalo, Thanks again, folks, for joining the show. Don't forget, go to baseballoutsidethebox.com, YouTube, Peter Caliendo. Check it out, subscribe. And finally, stay healthy, be safe. God bless you, and we will see you on the field very soon. Goodbye, everybody.